Drew, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Is that him?
Yes, we can see you.
So we need to pin him. You go ahead and make it large now.
We're gonna run a quick tech check with you, if that's all right, sir.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I've got you right now. I've got you. Hi, I'm Mary Pearl, by the way. Nice to meet you. I'm Michelle. This is Michelle.
Michelle.
Got you in the back of the room with us as we're getting the AV team set up to broadcast you on our screens.
Okay.
We're streaming live, so our virtual participants are seeing this, but those folks in the room with us that are finishing up their lunch are not seeing this quite yet.
Okay.
Our virtual attendees get a little bit of a preview of you and our tech deck, which is great. So we're gonna run. I'm gonna stop sharing.
That's like so, right?
No, sir. He's just gonna have just himself. Drew, did you have any slides that you were gonna show today?
I did not.
Okay, I didn't think so.
When is this?
That one's gonna stop right now. So I'm gonna stop sharing that one. And so he's here. So we're there we go. And I will move this out of the way. Although we're gonna want her, we're gonna want that one, and I'll pin that one when she's introducing. I'll pin her introduction. We'll go to that one first. Okay. Do we?
Now we need to get the audio situated.
Okay, so we're gonna test your audio, Drew. So I'm gonna plug it back into the. When I introduce her,
Okay, I'm hearing a lot of background noise.
Okay. Yes, sir. They're still eating lunch. We haven't stopped the audience in person eating lunch.
Okay.
So they're all chatting.
I can start introducing him like a couple minutes early, and then he'll be ready to go at 12:30.
That'll work. Okay, so I'm going to plug it in so that anything that you say now is going to be on our speakers here in the ballroom.
Okay.
Fair warning.
So go ahead and do the podium slide first. And then prepare to put this up.
Okay, so just to, so that you're aware, Drew,
Yes.
Michelle is going to get the audience attention here in the room. Our virtual attendees are currently listening and seeing you. Michelle's going to do an introduction of you, and then we're going to hand it away.
All right.
board chair of the Audubon, South Carolina Advisory Board and state affiliate representative for the South Carolina Wildlife Federation.
And emulates what it means to be a master naturalist. He is one of us. He is lyrical in the languages of science, humans, and birds, and his remarks inform art of endangered species and little known species to illuminate the importance of ethnic prism in seeing nature. He is highly acclaimed, highly awarded, and his highly celebrated literary works include The Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature, Sparrow's Envy, Poems in Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts. His way of seeing, hearing, and noticing the present and the history that birds and other wildlife traverse through our backyards and beyond is a revelatory way to be present in the world and life we live in our time. With Drew Lanham joining us today live from Seneca, South Carolina, you are in the true presence of a great naturalist. Here today to talk about coloring the conservation conversation as part of our Texas Master Naturalist Be the Change series is Drew Lanham.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm always humbled to be in the space with kindred spirits. And now we're in a time where we are necessarily remote, that we are distanced from one another. But fortunately, technology gives us the opportunity to gather, sometimes in even larger numbers, and in ways that that we never dreamed of. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to be with you today to talk about our shared mission, to share nature, to make wildness acceptable, to bring the outdoors in, and not just into our homes and habitations, but into our hearts and our souls. And so today I hope to share a little bit with you through my prism. And you'll hear me talk a good bit about identity. You'll hear me talk about prisms. And those prisms are bound up in our identities. That is who we are. Here in South Carolina, in the upstate of South Carolina, you, wherever you are in the great state of Texas, to understand our common thread as nature nurturers, as kindred spirits stewarding this earth. In these up and down days of fear, of exhausting stress, of breaking strain, of questions unanswered, days of discord, any comfort reliably, infallibly, yet comes in the sun resting westward and leaving light that stops my heart and makes it beat all the more rapidly at once. It comes in the birds still remaining, hurtling themselves across the face of a waxing hunter's moon, journeying to places better than here. I envy them in that courage to go where they must, in an obedience to follow wandering's pull. In these things I can rest my waning faith. It is not in any being of rumored omniscience or in four-walled religion beyond earth and sky and day and night, and those beasts and hours that fall in between what we can see or what we might believe. Until such time as the sun ceases to set in the west, or migrating birds no longer ply dark heaven following guiding stars, I hope, I watch, I breathe. That's a piece I wrote called Dum Spiro Spero, which is actually South Carolina's state motto, while I breathe, I hope. And I think appropriately, as naturalists, understanding that in the last almost 2 years, when we round up, sadly, breath is not something that we can take for granted, either by threat of viral plague or violence in the streets. And so today, in thinking about coloring the conservation conversation, I want us to give space to that time and respect those who are no longer here with us, but also to think about how we continue to do the work that we do as lovers of nature. I am a nature lover. I'm an ecophyte, as I often say. Like many of you, I'm a turned on outdoor addict, obsessed with the sights, the sounds, the smells, and textures that nature offers on an all-you-can-sense seasonal buffet. We are all wildlings. Here I am cast of mid-Carolina Piedmont clay and molded by the once mighty but now sluggishly dammed Savannah River. I am born of bottomland hardwood forest where the splotchy-barked sycamore reigns, and of weedy, rank fallow fields that once made the bobwhite quail whistles the music of my boyhood. Nature is our nurturer, and I am in it more comfortable than among construction and progress hewn by human hands. I confess here that nature is my goddess, and I make no apologies for worshiping the sweep of a bald cypress's buttress, being baptized in a soft spring rain, or taking communion from ripening muscadines. Birds sing and I weep. They fly and I wonder. In my wild obsessions, like so many of you, I live Walt Whitman's exaltations as a seeker of the sensual personified, rolling and reveling in all that nature lays before us. Now, to labels, we can claim many. Occupationally, I am an ornithologist. I'm a wildlife ecologist and college professor. I am also a bird watcher. I'm also a hunter. I am a gatherer. I'm a seeker and I am a noticer. These are not just the things that I do, but it is who I am. All of it, all of what we do, grounded in nature. Now, for all of those labels that any of us can claim, we can come together under the taxonomic label of Homo sapiens sapiens. I am a man of West and Central African descent, roughly 3/4 Cameroon Bamileke and Sierra Leone Mende. But then I am also others. According to the gene jockeys that drew a collage of German, British, and Irish with a smidge of Scandinavian from my spit, there is also a tiny portion of Native American. And East Asian, and yes, even a tiny bit of Neanderthal thrown in too. My double helix is this winding staircase that leads to duff green hues of Northern European peat bogs and the overwhelming evergreenness of the Congo Basin. For all intents and purposes, the science says that I am a mongrelized man. Those will call me, though, what they see. And so, yes, I proudly wear the outer label. I am a Black and proud man living in these United States of America. I am, by some in modern politically correct hyphenated nomenclature, an African American. Yes, labels matter. It is how we are often tagged to some task or sense of our identity, just as we might identify a dragonfly or a warbler. Now, most of us here are fortunate that the lines between career and passions often blur to the point of being indistinguishable. And so we become, in many ways, to others like confusing fall warblers, difficult to tell apart. But I want to take a few moments to ask some questions here for us to think about identity. Who are you? Yes, Texas Master Naturalist. You wear that label proudly. You may be faculty or staff from educational institutions. You may work for state and federal community organizations. You may be retired. You also, hopefully, are an amalgam of ethnic hues, of cultures, of regional identities. You come from an array of counties and townships and crossroads, and perhaps even places that most never even consider. You've been trained at some of the best institutions, and you've also honed your naturalist skills with mentors and experience. You are her and he and them with thousands of years of collective experiences and tens of thousands of hearts touched and minds exposed to the wonders of nature and the critical importance, this essential importance of connecting people to air and soil and water and wildness. You are givers. You, in fact, are magicians. You are conservationists. You are life pulse giving hope for sustainability. Who are we? Who do others even say that we are? Now, some would call us tree huggers, greenies, conservationists, environmentalists, wacko granola eating nut jobs, redneck and blackneck Bambi killing hunters. But here we all are in this same space, some of us virtually, some of us face to face, but in this place of kindred fellowship, gathered because of an appreciation for what nature gives, and then how we can give back. A conversation with a peer a few years ago, as I was about to attend a meeting similar to this one, this peer told me, he said, you know, I stopped going to those meetings a while back because they tended to be a dark gathering of people convened to hate people. I laughed at this initially, but I told him that I beg to differ. And I carry that forward because as much as we are here gathered to talk about the nature of our environment, to talk about our love for all things wild. This is as much a people business as it is about non-human beings. I see master naturalists as more than those folks who are taking a school group out on a hike and pointing to different species of plants, or leading a bird walk on some trail to identify the difference between ruby-crowned and golden-crowned kinglets. You are so much more than the name master naturalist would indicate. I want you to think of yourself not only as those people informed, perhaps better informed to talk about nature and the connections, but to think of yourselves as facilitators of thoughts and ideas. You are indeed educators and teachers, but you're also researchers, you're investigators, you're questioners, you're seekers, you're noticers, you're analysts, you're cynics, and you are also hopers. Your mission is ultimately to investigate and understand and extend the understanding of the environment. I want you to think on the mission of Texas Master Naturalists. Not that you have to have that memorized, but to understand what organizationally you're about. You know, you tear any mission apart, and then you think on the words to not only define that institution, but to define yourself. So you can think about how a mission statement or a vision can be improved. You can think about how it is made to be relevant to some eco-socio-political context. Now, that's a long word, but we can break that down into, again, how does it relate to others? And then I want you to dig deeply into your role as a Texas Master Naturalist, and then blend that with your own personal ethic to understand how they overlap. And then that overlap into your vision as a nature nurturer. So considering this is important in how we color this conservation conversation, in how we make environmentalism the empathetic mission. You see, I see us, no matter whether we're in Texas or South Carolina, Oregon or Florida, Maine, or Arizona. We are ultimately practitioners of a land ethic love craft. Think of us as quilters of a sort, stitching the broken pieces of patchwork together, fragments of imperiled emerald forest, remnants of climate challenged blue sky, the shreds of amber West Texas prairie under assault by pipeline, or meager measures of coastal marsh that are minimized by those who would envision them as something more productive, perhaps a strip mall or parking lot. I want us to see urban green spaces sprouting from abandoned alleys in cities, and nature connections in the concrete jungles that are waiting to be discovered. After all, we are also the imaginers working together to make our real world, our natural world, whole again. We are quilters. Yes, we are dream weavers, hoping and working for what might be. We're those people who hide in blinds to see, but not to be seen. And yes, I mentioned that there are magicians among you, muses as well. The muses inspiring others in wondrous ways to share purpose and passions and words and actions. I know this because I have been moved to make words that mean nothing to most, but everything to the few seeking passion in their nature-loving mission. And the magicians, I know of this magic because I have seen you as master naturalists create programs with little or no support and sometimes no funding. No, mostly no funding. I know that you're magicians because I've seen smiles come from nowhere, smiles that come to broken faces and squeals of joy that come to silence sadness. I've watched the magicians among you make something greater emerge than the sum of paltry parts that you've been given by limited budgets and agencies and legislatures that often see environmental education as an afterthought. So yes, you are more than just naturalists. You are nature's nurturers. We are lovers of the land. We are the purveyors of passion. Our purpose, wherever we are, is to pass on the best we know and can learn to make things better than they are. And so as we identify, as we seek, as we log and make available our knowledge, we're connecting, we're weaving, we're quilting, we're facilitating. And all of that serves to make this world a better place. And so I want you to fall back from the organization that you gather to celebrate, to venerate, to bring a better understanding of Texas nature to one another. Fall back a bit into introspection. That is the place of looking into oneself to then move outward and onward. And so I invite you as a wanderer for just a moment to wander down the pathway of inner self. I want you to think deeply about who you are. Think also deeply about where you are at this moment. And if you're fortunate enough to be in a space where you can safely sit with your fellow human beings, consider what the past year and a half or so have brought to us and how much we took for granted. I want you to think about the why of why you are a master naturalist, of why you do this work. Now, I can't see all the hands out there, but I want to see the hands of those who have become infinitely wealthy as a master naturalists, that suddenly millions of dollars have dropped into your laps because of your master naturalist status. Right now, I don't think I'm seeing any hands raised, but then I would love to see the hands of those Texas master naturalists who see themselves having been enriched by the experience of delving more deeply into nature, of connecting others to nature, of making that identification of the difficult dragonfly, of finally being able to tell the difference between a fall bay-breasted warbler and a fall blackpoll warbler. Try to put a price on the joy of that sunrise over a Gulf Coast marsh, or sunset in the Big Bend. Incalculable worth, that joy that comes from being in nature that you cannot put a dollar figure behind, is that enrichment we work for. And so I want you to think, as you sort of come inside to move outward and onward, I want you, please, to think about a personal mission statement, beyond who Texas Master Naturalist is, to think about who you are and want to be. As our collective balances hang in the balance, existences hang in the balance each day, they're bounded by these professional and personal challenges. Obviously, so many personal challenges over the past time. These external and internal stresses that visit us, we all watch and worry as nature is besieged, it's marginalized, it's collected, it's coveted, and cornered by often a privileged few. And we all watch as the survival of many of the wild things in green places seem increasingly uncertain. I ponder the condition of the earth and the stresses we impose upon it. But I know that we are called upon by something deep inside of us to keep as much of nature as we can, to help others understand the mantra of same air, same water, same soil, same earth, same fate, to move us in hopefully some sort of united direction. And so I join with you, Texas Master Naturalists, you, the kindred, wild, and caring hearts, you, the ecologically enlightened spirits, you, the wandering, wondering watchers, you who've committed to this mission to keep things whole. I want you to think about this in the time, the talent, and yes, the dollars that you give to be a part of something greater than yourselves. That means that you're taking disparate pieces and bringing them together for a greater good. This is the part of keeping things whole, of wrapping those Texas-sized arms around everyone, being inclusive and understanding the extremes from north to south, east to west, high to low, rural to urban, black to white, to brown, to red, and all other hues, he and her and them. That ultimately who we are as naturalists demands that we include, that we appreciate diversity, not only in the butterflies that we watch, but in the human beings that we are. And so I'm humbled to be among you, even as I sit so far away from you in the upstate of South Carolina. I'm most appreciative for being asked to talk to you about how who we are matters. how being a naturalist means that we also have to think about humanity if we are to keep all of these parts somehow whole. And so here I am, the Black kid who thought he could actually fly, grown into this ornithologist obsessed with flying feathered things. I am now the scientist. And there is that part of me within that urges me on to search for answers that will puzzle together all of these pieces and help us conserve nature, but then also ourselves. So I am grateful to have the opportunity to be one of you, to be a part of the community. And so when the time is right, I look forward to making my way to Texas. I have so many wonderful friends there, spent a great deal of time at the Rio Grande Valley Bird Festival with Mary Gustafson and so many friends there. Laura Zebehazy, a former student who is there in the Austin area. But looking forward to getting to Texas and wrapping my South Carolina arms around all of you, and looking forward to conversations that we can have about our shared mission to nurture nature and humanity. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
So nobody can hear me.
Yep, nice.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Awesome, yay.
Thank you.
What?
Are there questions?
Yes, sorry, we're figuring that out as we go along. But I was muted while you were receiving an amazing round of applause after your presentation. And now I want to see if anyone in the audience has questions. So I have one in the back.
Dr. Lanham, how do you deal with discouragement and disappointment?
Wow, thanks for the question. Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that it happens, right? And I talk a lot about we hear the word reconciliation these days, but before reconciliation has to come recognition. And that recognition is often not just what we identify, but again, how we identify ourselves. So let's think about first saying, there are days that are hard. And one of the things that I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I wanted to try to share just a little bit of a poem that that I think really goes to that whole idea of our difficulty in dealing with sort of life on this daily basis. And so I call this lifeless list, and I think this will get at your question. Do you know how? Do I have time for this?
You have plenty of time, 30 minutes.
Okay, cool. Lifeless list. Do you know how hard it is to admire plumage on a bird, to separate one warbler's chip note from another, or count the telltale hind wing spots on some butterfly? To know whether the fox's track is of a gray or red, or remember the name of that wildflower, or gather the energy to find the Latin binomial of a scurrying beetle in a field guide. Or maybe even give a damn what the name of anything is beyond that last black body that lay still after being choked and shot by the police, beyond the streaming calculus of hundreds of thousands suffocated by virulence. It is a lifeless list on some days I'd rather not keep, growing longer by the hour. There's little room left in my heart these hours for other names, just trying to keep mine off of it. So in reading that poem, that's a recognition. And I wrote that as I was sitting in the backyard watching rose-breasted grosbeaks come through in spring migration last year. And the point of that poem, to the point of disappointment, is admitting that we have it. A lot of people think because we work in nature that we're always skipping happily through Elysium fields, and that we don't have a worry or care in our lives. But I think that it really brings a relevance to the work that we do when we help people understand that we struggle too. And so for some days, what helps me is I'll fall back to my grandmother's ornithology, for example. On some days, cardinals are redbirds. On many days, yellow-billed cuckoos or rain crows. Okay. When the gray tree frogs start up, I'm thinking rain. Not because I have looked at the barometric pressure, but because I know the frogs can sense things that I can't, and my grandmother taught me that. And what that does is that takes me back to those boyhood days when there was no Twitter, there was no constant news stream. And what surprised me most was the covey of bobwhite quail that flushed from the blackberry bushes, where if I lingered long enough after my heart slowed down from that flush, I might pick enough blackberries to take home for a cobbler. And so that in that way, the disappointments of the day of the news stream, I can let go into the memories of better times. And so that's what helps me to sometimes immerse in nature. But I always tell folks that as bird watchers or butterflyers or whoever it is that we are, that our humanity is who we are. The birds are looking at us and they're listing us, right? So I want you to see as much as you can yourself in nature, to derive some empathy. So I still think about flying. I told you I was the black kid who wanted to fly, who kept trying to fly with cardboard wings. Well, that didn't work. It still doesn't work. But I will tell you that imagining, seeing, hearing migrating birds at night, the first white-throated sparrow of the fall season showing up in my yard a couple of days ago. And that bird isn't marked, it's not banded, doesn't have unique color bands, but in my mind, there's a great chance that it's the same white-throated sparrow that came last year. So that's heart phonology, right? And so you may not have the exact record of the date phenologically, but maybe you feel it in your heart and you say, this is, and we've all done this, this is about the time of year when. Now, the world is changing, right? Climate change has us guessing at times. But this is part of the way that we get beyond the disappointment of humanity, is to put ourselves in a different place and time, and then to project that forward.
Other questions? And Addison, are there questions online too? Does anyone in the audience have another question?
Oh, wow. People.
By the way, that was wonderful. I live in the Houston area. Many people here live in the Dallas area, and we are dealing with urban sprawl and many kids who have never seen nature. They live in the apartment complexes and the dwellings in the concrete jungle. And the hardest thing for me is trying to reach kids who are more connected via their phones and through technology and not from nature. Do you have any suggestions on how we can bridge that? I do this for my kids and my grandkids, by the way.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that work that you do. So many of you maybe can see this. What does that say? So guess where that is. That's on your phone, right? And so I want you to imagine how you would feel in today's world with, unfortunately, bad things happening sometimes. If before you came, as you came, and we've all been to those meetings in the past where they'd say, put your phone in the basket. How many of you did that? Don't, right. So here's the thing, and you felt in some way sort of threatened. So my answer to that is, in those urban areas, we need to not overlook the power of a pigeon's flight, right? That they're probably nesting peregrines in downtown Houston, and certainly I know peregrines find lots to eat in downtown Houston during migration, right? So to find nature where we are, sometimes in the crack of a sidewalk, that thing that grows up, and that you even see the commercials now that some people would call a weed, we can translate to wildflower. So helping, I think, people understand that nature is wherever they are, helps us to connect in ways that say we don't have to go elsewhere. And with our phones, to be able to take pictures. So I want you to think about this. Imagine some kid doing a TikTok on a bird that they saw. And they've got a following, I don't know, of 40,000 other people. How long does it take you to reach 40,000 people? Right. How many of you on social media have 100,000 friends? I know many 16 and 20-year-olds that have multiple hundreds of thousands of contacts. So I say that to say, I used to tell people, my college kids, I say, you need to leave your phone so you can pay attention when we're out there. And then to run into a situation where something bad happened, there was an emergency and somebody needed to be in contact, but also that they couldn't take pictures of the habitat, take pictures of one another in nature that they could then share on social media to connect other young people to nature. So now I'm a fan of this. And so I put my Instagram account up there because I want you to sort of see what I put out there, okay? And understand the power of this. And that if we can learn to help people leverage what this is, then they can reach far more people than we can look. I'm a 56-year-old ornithologist who would like nothing more than to have people go out into the field with, paper and pen and binoculars like the old days. But guess what? That's not how it is. And so I've had to learn how to use Seek. Is Seek perfect? No. But it gets people taking pictures, identifying or saying, you know what, that doesn't look right. And then all of a sudden you have a different brain algorithm. So that's my suggestion there. Sometimes you have to take your binoculars and invert them and turn them into a microscope or a dissecting scope. And you would be amazed what's in the crack of a sidewalk. You'd be amazed what's in an abandoned lot, the ruderal plants that are there. I know there are coyotes in downtown Houston. They're everywhere else. I know there are red-tailed hawks in downtown Houston, peregrines, pigeons, all of this wildness that's all around us. So try when you can. And it takes an effort for those of us. Look, I grew up country. I grew up real country. Edgefield, look in the dictionary, and Edgefield, South Carolina is one of the examples for it. But part of what I've learned is to try and appreciate nature. And during this pandemic, you know, my backyard had to become the Serengeti. Sands, tigers, no outdoor cats allowed, right? Unless a bobcat wandered through. And there are bobcats in this suburban neighborhood. So the challenge is finding nature, not just where we want to go, but finding nature where others are. Sometimes letting them show you. Does that make sense? And one other thing that I want to say here that's important, the one of the best ways to talk about nature, and I don't think we do this enough, especially in master naturalist programs that I know of, is to talk about foods. Now, I'm a hunter. I'm not telling everybody that they have to go out and shoot a deer and eat it. But I know hunting is an important part of the culture in Texas as it is in South Carolina. But I also know that people like fresh fruits and vegetables. So community gardens, are there any master naturalist groups or chapters that sponsor not just the wild habitats, but think about sponsoring gardens where people can pick a salad, right? And you don't have to worry about where your onions come from. It's because that's what we're doing now, right? We're worried about where our food comes from. And you're told that if you can't identify where your onions come from, throw them out. Well, what if you're able to say, you know what? I pulled those onions last Thursday from that garden down in that old vacant lot that Master Naturalist sponsored. And did you see all of the beautiful migrating monarchs that were also in the pollinator garden right beside it? Then you're not only appealing to the eye in those monarchs, you're appealing to the bellies in fresh whole foods. And guess what lies between the eye and the stomach? The heart. And in that way, we're pulling people in a different way. We all got to eat. Look at me, I've eaten a lot. and so it's important. So I think one of the things that we can do as naturalists is begin to think about those sort of very elemental ways that we can reach everybody.
Thank you, Drew. The next question I have for you comes from our chat, from one of our online viewers. And they ask, which of your poems or writing, and in which book, would you read to individuals who think of master naturalists as crazy tree huggers?
Thanks for that question. I was reading from Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts, and I would read to them from this book. I love poetry because what it does is when I write poetry, it's the freshest thing on my mind, and it's not edited a whole lot, really, because it's fresh from my heart and head. So I would read from there, because what happens in Sparrow Envy is that I try to break down the barriers as a scientist that keep people away from science, or the people that would deny it. I want people to understand that it's okay to call a northern cardinal a red bird, because guess what? It is a red bird. Now, if I can get people noticing that red bird, then the next red bird that shows up, you're lucky enough in Texas to have vermilion flycatchers, for example. And I can talk about how this red bird differs from that red bird. But this book, the Sparrow Envy, really tries to break down the barriers in ways that brings people in and not excludes them. So I want the science is there, but it's broken down. You'll see very little Latin binomial. You'll see my grandmother's ornithology, right? You'll hear me these days talk about tadpoles as the commas that stop me at a puddle, because that's what tadpoles look like to me. They look like commas. And I'm really super bad at punctuation. I write, but I'm not a great editor. But I like to imagine things in ways through poetry that brings people in and invites them rather than excludes them. So thanks for asking that question, and shameless promotion. It's out of Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts.
So yes, that's Sparrow Envy. And I just have to say, your writing and your poetry that you have is just a true gift. And thank you for it and for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you. I'm overjoyed. It's bittersweet. It's lovely to be with you in any way that's possible, and I know this was the most possible in the safest way. But for the sake of time and space, I'm going to claim my own rain check, and come out there not as a Cat 5 storm, but I'm going to come as spring rain, and hopefully be able to visit my beloved Rio Grande Valley again. But I've also have plans for. I've never been to Big Bend, and I've got that in my heart that I want to see Big Bend, not just for Kalima warbler, but I want to see that landscape, right? So I'm looking forward to getting back to Texas.
Well, you have a room full of hosts to take you there and to guide you through that.
Please.
I think we have another question.
Yes, the background, the room you're in. Can you kind of give us the history of that room?
Okay, so now I'm gonna kind of point, and this is sort of like being a weather person over your shoulder. But this place is called the Thicket, and it was one of these storage buildings that was for sale on the side of the road, and it looked cabinish to me. And so I had these grand ideas of pulling it onto some hunting property that I have about 2 hours south of where I live in Seneca, South Carolina. But that never happened. It just sat in the side yard. And I went inside one day and took all the stuff out that was accumulating and decided that I was going to use it where it was. And it became a lesson to me in sort of celebrating where you are, as opposed to waiting for some perfect space. So, for example, so over my shoulder here, you see like somebody in suspended state kind of walking. That's Aldo Leopold. That's a marionette that a friend from Wisconsin gave me. Then in front of him is a Carolina parakeet. And then over the shoulder is its partner, an ivory-billed woodpecker. You see there a northwestern mast, Pacific Northwest Coast mast, a replica of that. And then on the ceiling, you see all of the sort of vining branches. And I will tell you that today there is a Carolina anole that's running around in here that any minute could just decide to pop up, and we're all good. It's sort of my integrated pest management. So it's full of books, right? And it's become my Zoom room, but it's the place, it's only 20 steps from the front door. So it's very Thoreauvian in that kind of way. But it's surrounded by big, tall pines, and their native warm season grasses growing out. And I'm just waiting one day for a lone bobwhite quail to show up and whistle outside my door and take me back to when I was 8 years old. So it's called the Thicket, and it's a very special place to me. So thank you for asking. I've also got antlers growing out of my head, if you can see that. Yeah.
Was there another question over in this area? Or one more question from the group? Okay, Bert?
Thanks so much for your talk. That was awesome.
Thank you.
I would be remiss, I'm talking with the professional writer, not to ask for some help for our organization. So as many of us know here, Texas Master Naturalists are not well known, not well understood. In fact, when my wife and I were considering joining, she put in Master Naturalist, and the first thing that came up was nudist colony. So do you have any advice for our organization to better explain or encapsulate briefly and eloquently as you write and speak to get a message out to more people? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. One of the things that that many newspapers are often looking for are editorials, and people are also looking for good news, right? And so volunteer to write an editorial for your local paper. Volunteer to bridging, identities is important. Master Naturalist has so much in common with so many other organizations, but then it's unique in this way. Really, when I look at you, who you probably are as a Master Naturalist organization is almost like a congress of other conservation organizations in the state. Because let me see the hands of people who belong to other conservation organizations. The boom. Okay, so when you have an opportunity for those conservation organizations, and many of them will have presentations, or they're trying to fill calendars for presentations, volunteer to talk about Master Naturalist. Volunteer to write an editorial for the paper about Master Naturalists. Okay, and that word begins to get out. And I know that whole thing because they confuse naturalists with naturists, right? Those are people running around, with not so many exterior layers, but make, there's also a way to take sort of that that mistake that you made, and all of a sudden people learn who naturalists are. And in that way, you take sort of a faux pas and you make it into, and you leverage it into something better. So a lot of people think that it takes a huge number of dollars in marketing and that kind of thing to elevate an image. Really, what it takes is volume, right? It takes volume. On your social media, if you have, who has an Instagram account? Okay, there you go. If you've got Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, I will tell you, I use Facebook and Instagram mainly as nature blogs. Now, I sometimes also bring in the news of the day, but I always wind almost everything into my observations of nature. And so in that way, people come to know you as a master naturalist who's noticing your world, and you get to leverage that social media into others. And so I think that's very important, that we use the tools that we're given. Yeah, social media gets a bad name, and deservedly so in many ways. But when you go out there and you see the people that are using it in the right way to leverage good in this world, especially in noticing nature, then it can't be beat. It's like a megaphone with no volume button. And if you're screaming about some things, it's tiresome. But if you are telling people about the wonders of nature and what you see, then it becomes a very different sort of gentler message.
do we have time for one last, we do have time for one last question. Is there one lingering question from the crowd? Is there one online? Okay. Okay, Drew, I have a question that comes in from one of our online viewers. And June asks, the big box stores mostly stock non-native shrubs. My neighbors buy at big box stores because that's their comfort zone.
Mm.
How do we promote and recommend native plants when they're not stocked in big common nursery sections?
Wow, that's a great question. And I will tell you that in sort of full disclosure, my backyard isn't just natives, and not because I don't want it to be that way, but because so much of it was here. And it's a quandary when we think about it. One of the things that I noticed at one of the big box stores when I was there earlier this year, even for annuals, you'll notice that when you walk through all of these beautiful blooms, you see no pollinators, right? And that in part, because we're dealing with so many genetically modified organisms, that if you read the tag on many, even of these native plants, you'll read the tag, and what will it say? It will say that these are plants that are treated with certain insecticides. So even the natives that are available there aren't often the best. So, we talk about the old saying back in the day when I was in school was think globally, act locally. So I think we can also, as much as we can, try to buy locally, when native nurseries. And yeah, sure, sometimes those plants can be pricier, but there are also sales that native nurseries have. But as you're talking about native nurseries and pollinator plants and the like, also try to encourage those things. I talked about foods before. How many people here eat apples? Okay, right. So, you don't think about apple trees or a lot of fruiting shrubs as being invasive, right? Or displacing the things that we might want. So opportunities to talk to people about, for example, mixing in things that will provide treats for them, perhaps, as well as treats for the birds, are important. Certainly now thinking about drought tolerant species, which many of the native plants are, is important. So encouraging the local nurseries to really expand their market is important. But there is an issue that we have to address with the prices of things. They are not cheap, right? And so one of the ways through that is talk to your native plant society. Talk to the native plant society, and sometimes they have ends to seed sources. So I know our native plant society here in South Carolina, for example, right now they're out gathering seeds from native warm season grasses. And many of those seeds will be available, right, to folks. And it's different, right, to have to plant those seeds. Sometimes there's a little more preparation, but they're also adapted to your local area. So think about talking to your native plant society to see how they can also help you to sort of move people in that direction. But I also warn, I talked about the plants that were in my backyard or that I have to deal with. And I always ask people, what should I do with all those cedar waxwings when they're on that privet that's in my neighbor's yard, and the cedar wax, should I go and blast it with Roundup? What about all the monarchs that are showing up on that lantana? Should I go and chop it down and blast it with Roundup? So there are some gray areas that we really have to think about. And I wish we had time to talk more about it. Maybe when I get invited to Texas the next time, face to face, we can sit and talk, because these are some hard issues we need to talk about. You know, it's like talking about cats, and people think that I hate cats, and I just came from cuddling with our 100%, well, it's actually 110% indoor cat, Trey. But Trey does not get outside because I don't want Trey killing birds, right? And I don't want Trey to become a coyote snack or to get hit by a car. So it's as much about Trey's safety as it is about protecting wildlife. So you see how that works? People who may never identify a single bird, if you tell them that, you know what, the chances of your cat not coming home when you let it out at night are great, because a dog could attack it, it could get hit by a car, another cat, bigger cat, could injure it, or a coyote could grab it up, or a great horned owl. Then they'll think again about letting, if they truly care about that cat, they'll not think about letting it out at night. So we have a lot to talk about, Texas Master Naturalist.
Drew, I hope you know that you have a standing open invitation anytime to come to Texas. We'd love to have you in person at one of our upcoming meetings, wherever they may be. I want to thank you today for so much, everything that you said, the extra time you gave us today, and your talk and your message, and you were really the shot in the arm that we all needed for coming. This is the reward for being here in person and coming here today. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. And I truly look forward to seeing you in the coming year. So take care, be safe, and find some nature to be in.
We will. We do. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.